Okay, welcome everyone. I'm David Rammel, editor of Virtualization Cloud Review, here to moderate the first session as well as welcome you to our Modern Hybrid Cloud Security and Management Summit, brought to you by the fine folks at Veeam. Before we start today's three-session event, we do have some announcements. First, we want to let you know this event is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. You'll receive an email when the replay is available, generally within the next few days. Also, each of today's three sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. So please be sure to put your questions into the Q&A console as they come up so we can get them answered for you by our experts. And during today's third session, we will be giving away a Nintendo Switch. But you must be present to win, so be sure to stay on for the entire event. Finally, we do have resources from our sponsor Veeam available on the console right now, so please download and check those out. It's because of Veeam underwriting this summit that we can bring you this great content, so we thank them for supporting the community and ask you to check out those resources so we can bring you more events in the future. Now on to the first session of today's summit, Modern Hybrid Cloud Management Best Practices. This session features Howard M. Cohen, a senior consultant at the Tech Channel Partners Results Group. Howard is a 40-plus year executive veteran of the information technology industry who today writes for and about the IT Channel. He's a frequent speaker at IT industry events like Microsoft Inspire, Citrix Synergy Summit, and many others. He frequently hosts and presents webinars for many vendors and publications, just like he's going to do right now. Howard, it's great to have you here. Please take it away.
Thank you, David. Why is it that when you say 40-plus year, it makes me feel so old? Okay, hello, everybody, and welcome to Modern Hybrid Cloud Management Best Practices. Any of you who have been with me on other presentations know that as a writer, I love words, and I love to start each session with a word of the day. Today's word is a little bit different than usual in that it is a proper name. It is someone's name, and the name is Kipling, Rudyard Kipling. The Kipling method was the foundation, actually, of zero trust and many other things we go through, but you're all familiar. I guarantee you, every one of you is familiar with the Kipling method. It looks like this: who, what, when, where, why. That's the Kipling method, approaching analysis of anything from a who, what, when, where, why approach. So we're going to employ that approach today to take a look at cloud management, hybrid cloud management best practices. It's important to recognize that hybrid started way back when. The first time anybody ever decided to migrate any workload from their on-premises infrastructure to the cloud, that infrastructure became hybrid. It had an on-premises component and a cloud component. And since we all migrated gradually, one workload at a time, we stayed hybrid for a good long time. And it's very possible that we're still hybrid. I've often said that just about everything is hybrid. You've got laptops that think they're tablets, tablets that think they're laptop. All right, so we need to get to hybrid cloud. We need to manage and maintain it. Let's move on. Okay, so the very first step in setting up your best practices is an assessment. As we're moving into a best practices mode, you want to assess where you are, what you have. And again, we're going to take the who, what, when, where, why, the Kipling method to analyze this, the assessment stage. We're going to start with a complete inventory of everything we have, everything, all the users as well as the workloads and hardware, software, everything, and cloud services, of course, licenses. We're going to establish dependencies, what requires what to operate properly. We're going to classify everything so that we can manage them in groups, and we're going to pay attention to application programming interfaces. because quite frankly, they are the glue that holds hybrid clouds together. The ability to transfer data instantly and without your involvement is a very, very powerful capability that drives most environments today. So who? We want to know who owns each workload, because if we have questions about it, we're going to want to turn to that person. So who owns each workload? What does each workload do for the business? Why are we doing anything with this workload? Is it valuable to the business? Does the business derive value from it? When does each workload run? Now, this is an important question from a budgeting standpoint. Most every cloud service you're going to use offers discount reservations when you use them during quote-unquote off hours. So when does each workload run? Excuse me. Where? One of the most fundamental decisions we're going to make is, for each workload, are we going to continue to run this on-prem? Will this run in a public cloud, or will this run in a private cloud? And where within each of those environments will it run? Which service will we use to run it? And finally, the rationale. Why? Why did we decide to put that workload there, that workload there, that workload there? Why did we decide that this has a dependency on that and that has a dependency on that? Every decision should include a rationale so that people managing your cloud environment later on can refer to that and can gain insight into why what was done, and therefore take the appropriate steps to return it to the state it needs to be in. Next up is documentation. And when you heard me say that they need to be recorded, you probably thought immediately about documentation. Everything. This is true of any network, but especially true in a hybrid cloud environment where you have multiple services from multiple sources, some of them operating in a private mode, some of them operating in a public mode. You want to make sure that you have a written record of everything that's going on everywhere on your network. So let's take a look at documentation. As I emphasized in our last slide, you want to make sure you have an inventory of your cloud subscriptions. Many people have discovered that with all the comings and goings in the organization, they buy a new subscription for each person who joins, but they don't reuse the subscription from the person who just left. And so they have far more subscriptions than they need to operate their environment, and that's just a waste of money. So it's important that you include steps of checking the documentation to see if there are any available licenses to transfer to a new employee. That's a good example. A documentation of every configuration. Many of the things you're going to connect to require that you know what their static IP address is. You need to have record of all of those. Back in the earliest days of networking, and I'm talking about the 1980s, the 1970s, when dirt was new and I was entering technology, we had a concept called the run book. The run book was a compendium of everything you needed to know about whatever network you were managing. If things got updated, they got updated in the run book. And anybody who needed to do anything on the network could consult the run book. And I strongly recommend that sometimes the old practices are the best practices. Maintain one source of truth, one place you can go to get the IP address for anything, to get, if necessary, the master password for anything, and have a record of literally everything. Now, who? Okay, here's the who. Who will document each and every process and every procedure? It's probably not going to be the same person. You have different people managing different areas of the network. They should be involved in documenting what they're managing. So start to identify who you want to have write each part, each process and each procedure for each segment of your cloud environment. Remember to keep a close eye on what does each process and procedure impact. When you do one thing, what other things does that thing cause? We talk about things being either loosely or tightly coupled. If things are tightly coupled, then whenever you do A, you're going to have B happen. That's just a given. You can create a looser environment, a more loosely coupled environment, where if A happens, B may happen, but it doesn't have to. Now, this makes it easier to do A because you don't have to worry about the consequences. It's important to analyze that. It's important to understand what that is before you go ahead and make any changes. So when you're documenting your best practices, document the impact of one upon the other, the dependencies, as we said before. When will all documentation be updated? There is nothing more annoying than outdated documentation. We've all encountered this. When we're using software documentation and it tells you to click a certain button on the screen and that button just isn't there anymore. Very frustrating. So we want to make sure it's the best practice to always keep your documentation up to date. And whenever something gets changed, it gets changed in the documentation as well. Where will it all be kept? People need to know where they can go to get at the documentation. And also, everybody has to have the least privileges that they can possibly have to the documentation. There may be things you don't want certain operators to have. Passwords, for example, to various resources. So you need to establish a pattern of least privilege in what you're granting to each person who's going to use the documentation. And then once again, the rationale. Why was each process added? We've all experienced, what was the business case? We've all experienced processes that we can't figure out, why are we doing this? We do it every time, but why are we doing it? And the fact is that years ago, something went wrong. We created this process to correct it, and we've just kept it in there, and we do this process every time. The fact is, what went wrong never went wrong again. So we're doing that particular process for no good reason at all. Happens in every network, in every cloud environment. Root those out. Go on an occasional audit to find those processes that no longer have a good justification. Which leads us to governance. How do we govern all the resources, all the workloads, and all the services that we're using in our cloud environment? The three key issues here will be policies. Now, I just want to stop and say that if you don't have policies, you don't have a fully functional cloud environment or network. Everything in a well-managed network is policy-driven. We talk about firewalls for security. A firewall is designed to enforce your security policy. If you don't have a security policy, there's nothing to enforce. Same thing is true of everything. It all begins with policy. Users have to understand the policy, adopt the policy, and everybody has to cooperate to enforce policy. Acceptable use being the most popular policy that everybody's aware of. We've all heard of the EULA, the End User License Agreement. It's the acceptable use of any given software product. Same is true for every resource, every workload, everything that goes on in any networked environment, including cloud environments. And compliance is going to vary. Some of you are subject to government regulations, and therefore regulatory compliance becomes a matter of law. So that's very serious. But there are two other levels of compliance, one of which is your own company policies. Are your people all being compliant with your own company policies that we just talked about? And your EULAs, your end user license agreements, they have some policies that you have to adhere to. So are we in compliance with the software policies? Are we, for example, not copying the software and using it for more users than we have licenses for? So there's plenty of compliance that we need to pay attention to. And of course, the who is who has access rights to each resource and each workload. We need to know that. Every user has rights to certain things and not to others. That has to be documented. What can each user do and not do? The fact is, you may have access to a resource, but you may have read-only access, for example. You may not be able to make changes to that resource or that workload. So we need to know what rights each user has and what they can do with each one. This is an important question that isn't thought of often enough, but having regular audits, regular reassessments of all policies, procedures, and processes is a best practice. It's a powerful best practice. And therefore, we need to pay attention to it. Where do users go for support and answers? If they think something's out of a violation of policy, who can they turn to clarify that? Very important that people know that, because the longer it takes to find that person, the longer they are not working, and the longer their productivity is being impacted. And then, of course, we talk about identity and access management. How do users and their devices identify themselves? When a remote user, for example, has a tablet or a smartphone and they log into your network, they are first asked for an ID and password and usually a multi-factor authentication number to identify themselves and to authenticate themselves. At the same time, your network access control wants to know that the device they're using is authorized to access this network. So it interrogates the device as well. So we need to pay attention to how do both users and their devices authenticate themselves onto the network so they can use all of your, or the resources and workloads they have rights to. While we're on the subject of resources, again, policies, acceptable use, and compliance are the three major things we need to be concerned about for each and every resource that we're working with. So when we look at a resource, we need to be able to interrogate who has authorization to use that resource. And if names show up there that shouldn't, we need to remove them quickly. What are the available network resources? There should be a catalog in your documentation of every resource available on the network with an explanation of what that resource is used for, the business case, the rationale for that resource, and who has access to it. When are these network resources available for use? Okay, you may be a 5-shift operation, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and therefore everything shuts down. Very, very rare these days. With remote users all over the place, everybody is becoming a 21-shift operation, basically noon to midnight, Saturday to Friday, Monday to Sunday, however you want to look at it. That needs to be published. It needs to be examined. There may be periods of time where you shouldn't have the network available. Maybe you want to have a maintenance period, as an example. But that needs to be revisited from time to time. Where do users go? How do they obtain approval for new resources? If I'm a user and I suddenly realize that I'm going to need some accounting information to get done what I'm doing, who do I turn to? How do I go about getting them? Again, this should be easily accessed. Where to go should be something everybody can quickly find out, because the more time it takes to find that out, the more time they are impacting their productivity. And again, the rationale for each resource. Why was this resource selected as opposed to others? There should be access to the original request for proposal, requests for information, whatever documentation is available about each resource so that we can dig back at any given time And again, once it's maintained, it's maintained. It's out there. There's not a lot of work that goes into maintaining it. SPOG. Okay. SPOG. I don't know anybody who hasn't at one point or another used the term single pane of glass. Everybody's penultimate goal is to have one console, one ring to rule them all, a single pane of glass console. Now, it will never be this one, unless, of course, you're flying the Starship this week. But this does really bring out the concept. You want to be able to compare and contrast, for example, virtual machines from Azure with virtual machines you have running from Google Cloud or Amazon Web Services. You want to see the performance relative to each other. There's many speeds and feeds you'd like to be able to compare to see which one is performing best for you. The only way to do that is to have all three resources on one console. So the more you can fit into one console, the better. Just don't let the good be the enemy. Don't let the best be the enemy of the good. Sorry about that. Don't let the best be the enemy of the good. If you can't get it into one console, so you have two or three. Most of us have two or three monitors at least in front of us, so let that be your goal. Have a 3-monitor, 3-console environment. But yes, you want to be able to whittle that down to as few consoles as humanly possible so that you can see things in the context of other things. Keep that thought in mind, the context of other things. Compare and contrast. That's the purpose. That's the reason we always have the goal of going for the single pane of glass. Deliberacy. Okay. This is best summed up with some classic axioms like measure twice, cut once, the carpenter's rule. Same is true whenever making any change to a cloud environment. Measure twice, cut once. Make sure that you've planned out your change before you execute your change. Your hundreds or thousands of users will appreciate it. Also, take things one step at a time. Don't try to make a mass movement of all your workloads and all your data and everything, and you're bound to fail. Stay focused on one step at a time to make sure that ultimately you get there. And in terms of talking about time, take your time. I know that sounds counterintuitive in a world where everything's so in a rush, but the fact is you need to take your time to do it right. Now, when I say take your time, I don't mean grab the clock and run away with it. But the fact that this young woman is rushing says a lot to us. Don't rush. Don't rush. There seems to be never time to do it right, but always time to do it over. You don't want to fall into that trap. You want to be able to get it done right the first time. So take a slow, measured, step-by-step approach to any change that you're making in your hybrid environment. And finally, data. It's all about the data. There's so many decisions to be made. We talk about every workload. Where does it go? Is it public cloud, private cloud? We didn't even talk about storage leveling. Is this critical data that gets used every day, so we want to have it in solid state drives? Is it ancient data that we only use once in a blue moon, so we're going to put it on commodity storage? Those decisions have to get made. Three decisions that really make, that are important to me. Number one, belt and suspenders. Take a belt and suspenders approach really to everything, but mainly to security. You want to be sure that if anything fails, there's a failover, there's a backup, there's something that protects you. And so one step is not enough. There's got to be at least two. Encryption is your last line of defense, and data must be encrypted, period. It's got to be encrypted at rest as well as in transit. Most people see the sense of encrypting data as it's going from one place to another. But it also has to be encrypted at rest because people will try to break in there and corrupt your data or even encrypt it themselves so that you can't get at it. And that's where ransomware comes from. So be sure to always be encrypting your data. And remember that data begets data begets data. There's going to be multiple data assets. You need to know the valuation of each one. You need to know how they fit together, what data assets are dependent upon other data assets. And again, all of that needs to be documented. Again, a best practice. So we've been through the steps of devising and maintaining your best practices in assessment, documentation, governance, resources, that fabulous single pane of glass console, deliberacy in the way you operate your cloud environment, and paying very special attention to the data. We have somehow managed to get that all in within time despite our technical difficulties, and I really want to thank all of you and express my appreciation for your hanging in through whatever that was. Just a reminder that once you've made a transition, then you also need to have your best practices updated for your desired future state. Because inevitably all of these will advance to your desired future state, and your best practices documentation has to come with you, has to be updated. The job ain't over until the paperwork is done. Yeah, that's true here, and that's maybe the best thing to remember. And with that, David, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do, Howard, and thank you for a great presentation. Now let's take some reader questions. I'd like to remind the audience first that we can take questions up until about 5 minutes to the top of the hour in order to give you a short break before the next session. So please send them on in now. Okay, let's get right to the questions in the Q&A console. First come, first serve. Howard, what about multi-cloud? What's the difference between hybrid and multi-cloud?
You don't know how often I get that question, David. And it's actually a marketing problem because the folks in our industry don't do a good enough job of communicating some of the new terminology they create when they've created it. Multi-cloud, the simple difference. We talked about public cloud and private cloud. When you're talking multi-cloud, you're talking about, for example, public cloud and public cloud and public cloud and public cloud. It may be that you have an environment that requires certain resources from Amazon Web Services that only Amazon Web Services provides. You may have some operations that would really run best in the Google Cloud. And you may yet have other applications that really thrive in an Azure environment. And there is absolutely no reason that you can't have all three operating on the same network. So multi-cloud is simply multiple clouds of the same type, multiple public clouds, for example. And usually it's more often used in the context of multiple public clouds, although you could apply it in a multiple private cloud environment if you're using private cloud resources from more than one source. That's the difference.
Okay, great. I'll take a little levity break here. Quinn from the audience chimed in with Howard is the bomb. So that should boost your ego a little bit.
Quinn,
another reader.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Quinn. And I'm going to, as soon as we're off here, I'm going to go blow up. It's no. Thank you. Thank you.
Another reader was asking if you have an SLA with your internet service provider to handle the problems that we experience today. So you'll have to check that out. Okay, let's get back to the questions. Next one. Are there any good tools you can recommend to help us manage hybrid cloud networks better?
I just want to stop for a moment and thank the person who added the comment about SLAs, because it really is something I left out of this presentation. I apologize for that. It is important to know your SLAs so you can hold all your vendors' feet to the fire. You want to make sure that they're fulfilling those SLAs, and if you don't know them, how can you make sure that they're being fulfilled? Very good point. Thank you very much. In terms of good tools, yes, there are good tools. However, it is inappropriate in this setting for me to recommend any given one of them, except, of course, Veeam, because they are the sponsors of this session, and they have excellent products. But I would say that we're well into a time where best-of-breed tools are really not the rule anymore. The problem with best-of-breed tools is if you have a lot of them, you have to learn a lot of them, you have to get support for a lot of them, and if some of them are only understood by a few of your people, if those people leave, you have a useless tool. Today, people are moving away from point solution tools and moving toward best of platform. They're looking for one unified platform that can really help them manage everything from one place with one set of operations and one set of policies and procedures and one source for support and for training and so forth. So there are tools. I'd rather see you go looking for a platform that you would prefer in your environment.
Okay, great. And I'd like to take this chance to remind the audience to please send any questions you have, because we still have a good 5-10 minutes, and Howard lives and breathes this stuff. So this is a great chance for you to get an opportunity to get some one-on-one discourse from a bona fide expert. And speaking of which, here's a question from Lynn in the audience. How to handle integration and interoperability. Hybrid cloud environments involve the integration of multiple cloud platforms, on-premises systems, and third-party services.
Yes. Hello, Lynn. Good to see you here again. Lynn is a frequent flyer who always asks good questions like this, and I really appreciate them. In terms of handling integration and interoperability, the first thing that sprung to my mind when I heard the question was that you have to handle those first. You have to handle those before you do anything else. You have to establish that you can integrate a particular resource or service or whatever. You have to make sure that you can integrate it into your environment, and you have to make sure that it is interoperable within your environment. The two are relatively the same. Interoperable means you can use it in conjunction with everything else. Integrated means it will connect, and you need both. You absolutely need both. But you're right. There's going to be multiple cloud platforms, and especially in a multi-cloud environment, you're going to have services from different folks. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, they each have their own set of operating procedures, and they each have their own standards for security. They each have all kinds of specifications that you have to adhere to. The best answer I can give to this question is solve this problem before you ever connect anything, because it's so much more time involvement to correct something than it is to implement something. Take the extra time to assess the interoperability and to assess the integration functionality between a new service that you're considering and all the other services that are in your environment. This also speaks to the single platform concept. Often you can use the platform itself as an in-between, middleware. I hate to use that word, but connector between multiple different systems And I see more and more of them being designed that way to facilitate that. Thank you, Lynn.
Okay, here's the next question. You didn't say much about security. Why is that?
Oh, very simple reason. The next session after this one is all about security. So I figured rather than stealing the next presenter's thunder, I would kind of keep away from it, not focus on it, and allow them to do that. I would say that there is no more important there is no more important element than security. Security needs to be applied at every level of networking, from the physical layer at the bottom to the application layer at the top and everywhere in between. So I expect you're going to have a very enjoyable session after this one. But that's why I didn't touch upon it.
Okay, well, there was one question kind of related to security, and it might be off topic, but we have time to fill, so maybe you could take a stab at it. Question reads, I have recently heard the term supercloud. How does security and other issues apply to the supercloud, whatever the supercloud is?
Well, you're a step ahead of me because that's a new term to me. I really don't know.
Okay, we'll check that out. Here's a question from Quinn. Quinn asks, are we still trending toward 100% cloud storage goals, or are we seeing reality demanding hybrid storage solutions due to cost, performance, and management realities?
So wait a minute, Quinn. Did you say I was the bomb, or I'm going to bomb on your question? Okay, never mind. The fact of the matter is that hybrid storage, I don't know if it's going to be required. I don't think anything is required. There's what works best. And in terms of storage, cost is a major decision point. We talked before about leveling storage. I talked about it briefly. But when you level storage, you dramatically reduce your overall costs. You've amassed data over time. If your policy is that you don't destroy data until it's at least 10 years old, you've got 10 years worth of data, and most of it is old. You want to make sure that that's in the least expensive storage you can possibly have. And the same is true of performance. You don't need to get at that stuff fast. You need to get at that stuff eventually, when you need it. On the other hand, you have transactional data that's live all day long, every day. You need high performance, which is going to mean high cost. And what was the third thing you said? Management realities. If you're gonna level everything, whenever you store any data, you have to have full visibility of that data, and you have to be able to manage that data from every perspective. So those are always extant. They're not. There's nothing new or required about that. I don't see a world in which, it is conceivable that over the next few years, it may make more sense to move to 100% cloud storage. But I think that the old guard, people my age, are going to have to start dying out first. Our idea of belt and suspenders is, put it in the cloud, but I want to back up here on-prem too. It may be old-fashioned. It may not be necessary anymore. I don't know. So I don't know if that was a complete answer to your question, Quinn, or if I bombed on it. But I don't see us moving to 100% cloud all too terribly soon.
Okay, great. Looks like we have about 4 minutes left, so let's try to squeeze in 2 more questions, both from the audience. Bob asks, multi-cloud, he understands that multi-cloud is more than one of the same cloud, but he kind of missed the part where you explained hybrid cloud. So could you please just give a quick review of hybrid cloud and the differences between hybrid and multi?
Sure. Now, Bob, you've got to get to class on time. We talked about the nature of hybrid at the very beginning. And it's pretty simple. Whenever you're using more than one kind of location, for example, when you started migrating, you had all your data on-prem. Then you migrated one workload to the cloud. The moment you did that, you had a hybrid cloud network consisting of a hybrid of on-prem and probably public cloud. Later on, you may add more public cloud. You may add private cloud services. When you do, you're expanding your hybrid cloud environment. Hybrid simply means it's composed of more than one kind of processing and storage resource. Multi-cloud is more than one of the same kind, like multiple public clouds like Azure, AWS, and Google. But if you had something on-prem, something in the public cloud, and something in the private cloud, that's a fully hybrid environment too.
Okay, let's wrap this up with a question from Aaron. Looking to the future, Howard. Future crystal ball. How do you see edge computing and quantum computing affecting the cloud environment going forward?
Okay. So you're tapping into my futurist nature. There's no, I wish we had another hour. There's no short answer to this. Edge computing, let's think about edge computing, okay? The purpose of edge computing is to broaden the control you have over an environment, or maybe all environments, right? You're putting, in the Internet of Things, you're putting sensors and switches all over the place, and you're controlling them from a cloud resource. I've read a dozen stories in the last few weeks about people using Azure as the core of an extensive control system for a city or for a region. So the edge, the edge is where all of those little devices are connected and have to somehow or other be able to backhaul to your central cloud environment. How will this affect that? The fact is that, I guess the reason I'm having a problem with it is because everything is hybrid. Most every environment I can think of is a hybrid environment. And so I don't know that it'll have impact on edge computing, but it will certainly make use of it'll certainly make use of hybrid computing. I'm not sure if that's a satisfactory answer. As far as quantum computing goes, quantum is just one of many initiatives, if you will, to make computing bigger, better, faster, bolder, and add new functionality that we can't even imagine yet. I suppose that we will see hybrid environments that are composed of normal computing and quantum computing. I have no idea what that's going to look like. I suspect there's going to be some throttling involved to enable today's normal networks to keep up. But I don't have a very good prognostication beyond that. But I thank you very much for the question.
Okay, well, it looks like that's all the questions we have time for. So thanks again, Howard, for a great presentation and answering all those questions.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to our previous presenters, Howard and David, for powering through some technical difficulties and still presenting a really great, informative presentation. As well, thank you to our sponsor, Veeam, of course, for underwriting this summit and allowing us to bring you all of this great content. My name is Gladys Rama. I'm the editorial director here, and I'll be moderating the second session of our Modern Hybrid Cloud Security and Management Summit. This session is called Modern Hybrid Cloud Security Best Practices. Our speaker today is a frequent guest here at our summit, Greg Schultz, Microsoft MVP and founder and IT analyst for Server Storage IO. Greg, if you haven't heard of him before from our previous summits, he's worked as both a customer and vendor in multiple IT organizations in his storied history in this industry. He's also a consulting analyst and author of several books, including Software-Defined Data Infrastructure Essentials. Greg brings a diverse background with real-world perspective across applications, data infrastructures, hardware, software, and clouds. He's also a Microsoft MVP Cloud Data Center Management and a previous 10-time VMware Z-Expert. Greg, I will leave the floor to you.
Outstanding. Thank you. Hello, and welcome everybody to today's discussion, Modern Hybrid Cloud Security Best Practices. And I am Greg Schultz, as Gladys mentioned, and we are going to spend the next 45 minutes or so, along with some Q&A discussion, talking about modern hybrid cloud security. Anyway, let's dive right into it. Big picture. And let's talk about the hybrid cloud security. And this, what we're going to talk about is going to focus around the hybrid cloud, but it could span multi-cloud, private cloud, public cloud, government cloud, even the new and emerging super buzzword term, super cloud, which we're going to dig into that in a future date. But for now, here's the thing. The whole focus is around that ability to protect, preserve, secure, and serve information in a hybrid environment that can span multiple locations, different functionality. And what you'll see here on the screen, and you're going to see this reoccurring as we go through some slides here, is there's what I've got across the bottom, and then there's what I've got over on that right, which is the vertical. So across the bottom, that's the horizontal view. In other words, from core, hybrid, public cloud, multi-cloud to on-prem out to the edge. And over there on that right, those are different layers, different focus areas of things that come into the discussion, from low-level infrastructure to platforms as a service to software as a service up to IoT and other devices. But as part of this big picture, what we have to look at is that there are different attackers. There are different threat risks. We'll dig into more of these as we go. There are the bad actors, the bad attackers, that might be targeting people. They might be targeting technology. They might be using software-defined, i.e. bots, malware, and other things to attack your organization at different points and in different ways and at different levels. So again, part of this is to ability to protect, preserve, secure, and serve, is that we have to understand the threat risk, the attacks, how those attacks are occurring, where they're attacking, but also the different points of vulnerability, from the edge to mobile, work from home, overall your app and your organization, and then also how they're going to go about doing that. I mean, there's all the technology aspects, leaving doors and windows and endpoints open, unlocked, unsecured, but there's also things like social engineering, which we'll touch on in a bit. Okay, so as we dig a little bit deeper into this, and again, remember I just mentioned here, is that our discussion is spanning horizontally across different locations, different platforms, different services, whether that be core cloud, whether in a private cloud, public cloud, multi-cloud, but also traditional on-prem as well as out to that edge. And again, across those different layers. So across the bottom there, we see the infrastructure components, wherever they happen to be: physical machines, PM, bare metal machines, VM virtual machines, containers, different services at Cloud A, Cloud B, Cloud C, on-prem, the edge. So we've got all these different points where data infrastructure resources are, i.e. the hardware, the software, the networks, the different ways of resource encapsulation, compute, I/O networking, but also management, tools, metrics, telemetry. And above that layer, we've got the different platforms, which could be that infrastructure as a service. It could be repositories like databases, whether they be SQL, NoSQL, management tools, development tools, Kubernetes management type environments, things like that, that in turn support those higher level, whether they're your own in-house developed apps, whether they're legacy or cloud native, but they could also be services like O365 or Salesforce, among many other different ones, along with different management tools. So keeping in mind that we've got these different layers, and with each layer, there comes that benefit of adding abstraction, but with each layer that comes that task of having to protect it, secure it, as well as the associated complexity of having those different layers. And then if we think of that going across those different environments, it could be Amazon, it could be across Azure, it could be across Google, it could be a mix of on-prem Windows and Linux and other sorts of things out to the edge. Okay, so it's about focusing to be able to enable those environments to be protected. Okay, here's a visual representation of what I was just describing and what we're going to build on a little bit more, which is that we've got these different environments, and these different environments have these different resources. Some of them are storage related, whether that be objects, blobs, whether it be files, block, whatever it happens to be, or tables for databases. And these could be encapsulated as cloud virtual machines, cloud containers, Kubernetes as a service, whatever your consumption happens to be, along with different network endpoints, different ways of accessing those. And again, keep in mind, across those horizontal, across those different sites, and those different layers. Okay, so as a part of that packaging, we have to keep in perspective is that here is that landscape of what needs to be protected, secured, preserved, and be made safe. And if they start thinking about it, all these different points where things can happen, and the different encapsulation, whether it be out at the edge, whether they be in your core on-prem or your core public, or across the different clouds. But there in the center, there's a little bit of a curveball, which is there's that term HCI, hyperconverged infrastructure, which is a way of encapsulating the compute, the storage, the networking, the management tools, virtual machines, containers, different way of consuming along with that management, that in turn could be considered a private cloud, whether that be on-prem, whether that be out at the edge, or whether that's actually layered running on top of resources in a public cloud, all of which fits under this umbrella of needing to be protected. So the more we understand what we need to protect, we can get into some of the different threat risks and start talking about how to do that. All right, we're going to take a little bit of a step back, but we're also going to dig into the core of this, which are common hybrid cloud issues and challenges. And again, our focus is around the security, but as a part of that security, we have to understand the common cloud issues and challenges, which include data protection, the availability, the resiliency, archiving, backup restore, snapshots, replication, versioning, different things like that, high availability, business resiliency, business continued disaster recovery. And you might say, what does that have to do with security? Real simple. If you're impacted by a ransomware or you've had your infrastructure, your apps, your data compromised, you're going to need to have that backup, that snapshot, that ability to go back in time. If you can't go back in time when something happens, you're not going to be able to go forward to resume where you're back. So data protection is a part of that. We're going to focus more on the threat risks here in a couple of moments, but generally speaking, from a security, there's the endpoint protections, protecting the IP addresses, protecting your endpoints, protecting your load balances, your firewalls, how people are going to get in, along with access authentication, authorizations, rights management, protecting and managing keys, certificates, delegated authority, both being able to grant those, monitor who has them, but also to be able to revoke those, to take them back. And where this comes into some more challenges is that we've got these different locations, we've got different geographies to think about, which brings in compliance and regulatory mandates, data privacy, governance, get into some of the buzzwords, GDPR, Global Data Protection Regulations, HIPAA for healthcare, SARBOX, PCI, and not the PCI IO bus, but payment card industry. So there's a lot of different aspects to that tie into security and being able to protect, preserve, secure that environment from those different points, on-prem, the cloud, public cloud, edge. We also have in here service management, service level objectives, service level expectations, service level agreements, RTOs, RPOs, or recovery time objective. But over there on the right, these are management challenges, but they're also security challenges. Where are you going to manage from? Which means where are you going to manage your security from? How are you going to coordinate cross-platform security? How are you going to accomplish training and skill sets, particularly related to security, across those different platforms, that horizontal in the bottom, and up and down across those different layers and stacks, what we see there on that right. Now, certainly there's budgets, risk assessment of the business, the apps, the data. What are the business requirements? What are the platform dependencies? Also, where is the authoritative copy? You might have versions of data in different places, different clouds, if you would, but what is the authoritative copy? What is that master copy that everything else is defined or based off of? What about visibility? Are you flying blind in the clouds? Do you have timely insight? Can you find and detect threats, blind spots across multiple locations, anomaly detection, log analytics, different things like that? So let's dig into this a little bit more. And I'm going to bring back the layers here for a moment. If you recall, a couple of slides ago, I showed working across different layers, different altitudes if you want, if you prefer. And in the course of that, we just want to keep in mind that on that left are things that are part of those different layers, the up and down, that can span across those locations. And then across those different layers, there are going to be different threat risks that can impact things. In other words, an attack at the higher level, does that also apply to that next level down, the platform as a service? Does it also impact the infrastructure? Does the threat, does the attack, the impact, is it at that infrastructure, and how are the upper levels impacted? So again, we want to keep these in perspective as opposed to just tunnel vision in on a particular area. Okay, so let's start to talk about the threat risk and what can be done. Okay, so across the top on this slide, on the left, we've got that threat landscape, and also some more of those over on the top right. On the bottom, those are your building block enablers. They're tools, technology, processes, procedures, training. And also on that lower right, the enablers. So there's one thing to have the technology, the other is how are you going to go about using that. So if we look up on the top there for a moment, the threat landscape, as we opened up with, is there are different actors, there are different attackers. It could be accidental, i.e. a human error, a typo, a mistake, or it could be intentional. It could be acts of man, it could be acts of nature, hurricanes, floods, things like that. Here's the thing to keep in mind, that the threat could be loss of data or loss of access to the data. It could be loss of an application or loss of access to that application. Everything might be intact, but you've just lost access because of a network problem, a denial of service attack, whatever it might happen to be. So then we have to keep in perspective is that other threat is that the apps and the data may be damaged, they might be completely destroyed, or that only a subset are impacted. The other thing we have to keep in mind is that it's not just the damage or loss to the data. It could be that data has been stolen, it's been compromised, it's been exposed, and was it encrypted or not, or how well was it encrypted, and who has access to those keys. Also in the threat landscape, over in that top right over there, as I mentioned, the errors, they could be human, they could be technology, could be hardware, software related, or in the network. They could include the cloud itself, the different public cloud services. It could be a mobility issue. It could be from work from home, the edge. You might be dealing with a zero-day exploit. In other words, something that has just been in your system, whether it's for days, weeks, months, or maybe even longer, just waiting for a particular time when it's going to expose itself. Okay? This is where the software-defined also comes into play, in that it could be, an AI-powered bot, attack, malware, ransomware, but also social engineering. Social engineering is tricking somebody, phishing somebody to give you information, to give you a username, to give you a password, to give you a key, to give you something, for example, your codes to be able to do multi-factor authentication. Social engineering is tricking you into doing something. Maybe it's via an email, maybe it's via a text message, it might be a phone call, it could even be a letter or from somebody impersonating somebody, something, to try to trick you in to getting information to get into your system. So how are you going to block those attacks? How are you going to prevent them? How do you enable your security? It's those things there on the bottom lower left and lower right. Encryption, keys management, identity and access management, prevention, but also detection and remediation. When something is found to be broken, fix it. Part of that is also a policy, which is learn from when things happen. Go and find out what happened. How did it happen? When did it happen? So that you can prevent it in the future. Having good backups. And that when I say backup, it could be a traditional backup, but it could also be a snapshot combined with replication, so that the snapshot itself is also protected somewhere else, as well as having your basic availability procedures and education. So it's that combination of tools, technology, training, having awareness and insight into your environment, but also having policies, best practice, and doing things like education of your users, of your workers, everybody involved, from the end users out to the people in the core infrastructure, but also doing penetration testing, pen testing, to test, to find proactively where are the weak spots. Okay, so here's the thing. A lot of different threat risks, and we'll continue talking about these threat risks as we go here, here's the thing. Don't be scared. Be prepared, okay? Know the threats to be able to detect, defend, deflect, and diagnose against these different impacts. Also understand your organizations, the apps, the businesses, but also understand the impacts. Is it going to be a complete loss? How are you protecting against loss of access, loss of apps or data, as opposed to a partial loss, a destruction, damage, corruption, or just that data has been compromised, theft, it's been exposed. So knowing the threats, the applicable impact to the business, the apps, the data, being able to detect, diagnose, defend, deter, educate, and have backups, those are all part of being prepared. Leverage automation where practical, but also have flexible, fast recovery, and also test those recoveries. Some would say have zero trust. I say trust but verify. And then whatever your preference is, the whole point is test things, try things, make sure that you have everything protected as best you can, and then learn from different incidents. All right, so know the threats. What are the applicable threats and impact to your biz, your app, your data across those different horizontal points of interest, up and down those vertical stacks? Is the threat or incident real, or is it part of a larger attack or probe? Are you being tested to see how protected your environment is without the attacker exposing what they're really doing? What's the impact to scope? Everything, or is it geo-specific, or is it an application-specific? Is the data on the apps intact? Is it simply that the access is denied, or has some damage occurred? If damage has occurred, you need to restore the entire app, all of the data, or can you focus and do a more granular recovery? Again, is the incident a loss of access to the data or just a breach? Understanding those as part of the bigger picture helps you put into place how you're going to secure your environment at these different points at these different places, at these different locations, up and down that stack against different threats. So a little bit more on those threats. What are you protecting? What are you protecting from? When, where, why, and how? Everything is not the same. There are different threat risks to different points of your organization, to different apps, to different data. So having that understanding from a business perspective is key. Having that business impact assessment analysis, understanding the environment, data classification, app classification, having that good view of things, and understanding, is it a full destruction, a partial damage, data loss, corruption, is it that loss of access, information leak? And then we start to see, again, some of the different things are on the left that can happen, but what's that impact, which then, again, don't be scared, be prepared. We see that those different things can happen at different layers. Higher up, the application landscapes, databases, further down, and the operating systems, the hypervisors, the runtimes, the virtual machine to containers. They can happen at different layers, so be prepared. Okay, so part of this is having multiple layers and rings of protection. Now you might say, geez, I don't see any rings there. Well, instead of using rings, I'm using triangles. You could use rings if you like, traditional approach, but what I'm showing here is breaking this up into three pieces. Over on the left are the relative threat risks to your different apps, your different parts of the business that might be high risk, might be low risk, that you're seeing how they're being defended against. Hopefully you're being attacked and they're just being deflected away. You've got your force shields up, you've got your good defenses up, things aren't getting in, things aren't happening. So down there on the lower left, there's the common recurring known threats that are known about that your systems, your technology, your people for that matter, are able to defend against where you can lever automation. Right above that on the left is the emerging threats that, something is new, let's look into it. Okay, let's add that to our automation, let's add that to our defenses. And then there's something that is maybe really new, really fresh attack. It's a high risk. Okay, get your people involved on something like that so that you can leverage then how you're going to defend against that on a go-forward basis. Across the bottom is that data protection, the ability to do backup restore, which could be traditional backup restores, fulls, incrementals, synthetic, differentials, snapshots, point-in-time copies. You get the gist. It's taking protection at different intervals, having copies, having different versions in different places so that you've got that along with your firewalls, your endpoints, encryption, and other things. In the middle, that upside-down triangle looks more at how are you going to detect, defend, and respond to these different threats. Where do people get involved? Where does technology get involved? How do you leverage your different software to guard, protect the different points of attack, the different layers, and things like that? And that's where you've only got so many resources. You only have so many staff and security analysts and professionals to deal with things. Leverage automation where you can, but there are certain things that it's easier to have the people work at it while the technology, the automation, the AI, the smart technology, whatever you want to refer to it as, is handling those routine, the recurring, the known threats, where then the people are freed to work on the real exceptions. And then when we see over on the right there, that's where we have the different policies, the different procedures. That includes education, training, learning, remediation, fine-tuning. And again, this is across all those different points of interest, from the public cloud to the on-prem to the edge, as well as up and down those different layers. Okay, so again, don't be scared, be prepared. Okay, now let's think about this in terms of, we know what the threats are, we know about the applicable impacts to the biz, to the different apps and data, as well as what those impacts are going to be for different things. Now we want to be able to detect, diagnose, defend, deter, as well as educate our users. That ties back to that social engineering, as well as have good backups, have good copies, have versions, multiple versions of those in different places. So it's knowing your threats and the impacts, plan for the unexpected, plan for complete reconstruction or a granular restoration, rollback, or restart. So in other words, you need to bring back an entire app and all of its databases, or is it as simple as just bringing back a particular table or a particular folder of a file system or a particular set of files or folders? Okay, what's that granularity? How do you have that factored in for speed of restoration, speed of restart, things like that? So again, having a good defense, that good deterrence and detection, using managed detection and remediation response, alerts, analysis, and having that flexible data protection so that you can go back in time, having those different versions that you can go back to time, as well as having different copies of those different versions. It's one thing to have multiple copies, but if they're all corrupted, that's not good. It's good having multiple versions, but if you only have one copy and one of those goes bad, that's not good. So things to keep in mind, as well as leverage immutable. In other words, the data can't be changed. It's air-gapped, where that protection copy, it might be online, but it's not accessible. It's not as easy to attack, which means also protecting the data protection, protecting the security schema, protecting your logs, your keys, your credentials, all your different settings. All right, so here we get into some of the different technology. There's a lot going on here, but just to kind of give you that taste, to give you that sample of some of the many different things that come into play. You know, a common question that pops up is that is hybrid cloud security just a topic, a focus area for the security team? I would say no. It should be it should be a hybrid focus. In other words, tapping into leveraging different skill sets, different people from different parts of the organization that have different focus areas, spanning admins, server storage, networking people, the operating systems, the different layers, the DBAs, certainly as well as security, among others. It's a more holistic approach that if you want to think of it as a virtual team, that's a good way of looking at it. So again, because you're protecting the endpoints, the network access, both public and private, you're protecting the IoT, the Internet of Things, and mobile devices, taking care of those credentials, those keys, those settings, while maintaining user productivity. What you don't want to do is put in such a rigid security system that people are going to be writing down passwords and posting them and doing things that actually open up new vulnerabilities that you're trying to protect against. So we have to protect the different services, the service endpoints, the apps, the data, as well as at different layers in different locations, protecting the database repositories, the compute, the different forms of bare metal, physical metal, virtual machine containers, as well as protecting the management tools, and also protecting the data protection tools, not just the copies, but also the logs, the catalogs, their different settings, and also protecting logically, but also physically, making sure physical doors are locked, that people aren't tailgating. Things that hopefully are common sense, but it's like when you leave home to go somewhere for a walk or go to work, are you leaving your front door unlocked? Do you have rings so you feel comfortable that, hey, I can leave my front door unlocked? I can leave the back door unlocked. I'll leave a window unlocked. Well, are you doing similar things in your environment, just doing a different variation of that with your endpoints, with your apps, with your network, with your access, different things like that? Over there on the right, that's buzzword bingo. Pick out your favorite buzzword, topic, technology, and focal area. Okay, so as I mentioned before, there are different attacks, different issues, different challenges. And this is we have to protect from the external, but also internal. And where, for example, somebody gets into the environment, does that mean now they can run free and just go around to the different systems? Hopefully not. Hopefully that whoever is authenticated within your environment can get to what they're allowed to, but that even if somebody were to get in, that there are still different layers of protection to prevent somebody from doing nefarious things, whether it's accidental or intentional, as well as meeting your compliance and your regulatory. But one of the other complexities of all this, which is why do we have hybrid in the first place, is to leverage the different resources, but it's also inheriting these different data infrastructures, these different environments from mergers, acquisitions, from shadow IT, from departmental, different work groups, things like that. So that's all part of putting all this together and defining your security strategy, your data protection strategy, which go hand in hand in these hybrid environments. Here's a few more tools, technologies, if you would, as well, that come into play. Insight. Having timely insight is critical. Likewise, for automation, it's garbage in, garbage out, meaning that if you've got bad telemetry, if you've got bad information coming in, detection, notifications, your automation is only going to be as good as the data flowing into it, but also the policies that you've defined for it to do or have enabled. So you have to have good, timely insight, information, detection flowing in, and flowing across to the different tools. Doing things like monitor, detect, resolve, MDR tools, identity access management, multi-factor authentication, protecting those keys, certificate, credentials, and passwords, using shared access signatures for accessing resources, as well as via the HTTPS, SSL, LDAP, etc. Doing things like on your browser, making sure that you get a warning if somebody goes to an HTTP site. Ran into this morning. Every day I am amazed at some of the sites that don't have HTTPS enabled. To me, that's basic functionality. And yes, my sites have it enabled. But little things like that, protecting the SSL access, LDAP and Kerberos, protecting your logs, having logs turned on and enabled so you can go look and see what happened. Yeah, they take up space. Yeah, they take up compute, but you're going to need those to figure out what happened and how to prevent it, which can be more costly if you don't have them enabled. And there are ways around addressing those cost impacts of extra storage, network, and compute. And again, encryption. Encrypt at rest, encrypt in motion, encrypt virtual machines, encrypt mobile devices, encrypt. Encrypt. Anyway, let's move on. So a lot of this comes back to your management and techniques, those layers and rings of defense, having timely, accurate insight of what is going on, what is taking place, where things are. And again, what it means, if you're in the cloud, you don't want to fly blind. Well, geez, great. We've got instrumentation. We've got dashboards. We've got all this stuff so that we can fly in the clouds, and great. But instruments are only as good as the data that's feeding those instruments. So it's crucial having that timely, accurate insight, leveraging the automation, but feeding the different tools with that timely insight, setting up the policies, setting up when different things are going to trigger different events and who's going to be notified. Doing pen testing, penetration testing, having things like red and blue teams, red attacking, blue defending. How well is your environment protected? But also doing things post-incident analysis, forensics. Something the public cloud providers, I think they do a good job. Can they do better? Absolutely. Is publishing information about what happened, why it happened, what has been done to resolve it, and what's going to be done in the future. That same thing needs to apply in your modern hybrid cloud security environment, is when something happens, okay, how did you fix it? Why did it happen? How are you going to prevent it from happening again? Is it technology related? Is it a process, a procedure, education, all the above? Okay? But it's also doing remediation, applying those lessons learned, but remediation, making sure that your apps, your software are updated, your firmware are updated, your drivers, BIOS, different things like that at different layers up and down that stack, but also across those different points of interest. And again, reemphasizing that education of your staff, your users, so that they can get their work done, that they're not impeded by the security, the data protection, so that they don't try to thwart it. And again, that focus around social engineering awareness. All right, moving along here. Don't be scared, be prepared. As I mentioned, leverage automation. Also, flexible, fast recovering and testing. Make sure that the testing does work. What's the impact? What's that granularity to recover, to restore from? Is this a restart, a rollback, a recovery, or complete reconstruction? What recovery point in time will you go back to? Where will you recover or restart to? On-prem, in the cloud, in a different cloud, somewhere else? And how are you pre-staged to be able to do that? How have you tested? But also, what are the other impacts? What are the other dependencies? Have you detected anything else? Have you preserved the logs so that you can be doing forensics, so you can be doing other analysis, right? Keep a plan current. Have a plan, have a strategy, have a plan that is evolving with the different threats, the different risks, and that plan includes hardware, software, remediation, training, best practices, policies. It's not just the tools and technology, it's how they're going to be used, how they're kept up to date. And again, part of this is people, part of it is technology, part of it is all the procedures, the best practices that put these all together. It's leveraging what the cloud providers have and their best practices along with your best practices and putting it all together in a hybrid approach. All right, so I mentioned this just real quickly. Have that insight, have that awareness, have that visibility across the different clouds, the different providers, the different services. Know your apps, know your environment, and just avoid flying blind. All right, as we wrap up here, a couple more things is leverage the insight tools. How effectively can you manage your costs, but also leverage what you're protecting? Gain that visibility, know your workloads, know what's normal, understand where the anomalies are, and just have that timely insight. Avoid flying blind, know the environment, and also keep in mind the different metrics that matter. Have that good data protection, the backup, the point and copies, checkpoints. Be able to do it at different layers, different altitudes to be able to protect that environment, whether it's on-site, primary cloud, public cloud, and so forth. Okay, next to wrap up is this. I touched on this earlier. It's that understand the cloud and your business impact by these different threat risks. Are you going to treat everything the same? Are you going to treat all apps and data the same? Or are you going to look at them and say, you know what, some of our environments, some of our apps, some of our data doesn't need to be protected in the exact same way as other things. So you want to find a balance between treating everything the same and over making things too complex. Find that balance there. But know and understand your business, but also get the business buy-in. You don't want these technology, you don't want these policy procedure decisions to be made by your teams or the teams you're a part of. You want somebody higher up the management stack and from the business, from finance, from compliance. You want their fingerprints on these decisions so that when something happens, you've got their buy-in, their fingerprints are on it. So again, what does the business need versus what they want? Needs equals they should be able to get you funding. Want means it's going to probably be a wish list. So understand that. And again, just understand the different threats, the different threat risks, and their relative impact to the business as well as the different business units. What's the likelihood of something happening and what's the likely impact? All right. I said that before, or say it real quick here. Trust yet verify. Ability to protect, preserve, secure, and serve. Test your backups. And not just that, yeah, they work, yeah, we can do a restore. Is the data actually good intact? Has it been corrupted? Do you have a really good copy of bad or corrupted data? Do you know that somebody was able to get in via your detection? How far in did they get? Where did they stop? If they stopped somewhere, you might go like, oh, geez, our defenses are great. They didn't get any further than that. Maybe that's all the further the attacker wants you to think that they got. Maybe that was just part of their testing to see where they got. So again, review your best practices, align with the cloud recommended practices, and create that hybrid strategy. All right, let's start to wrap up, and then we're going to jump into some Q&A. So have a plan. Be ready to adjust it, execute it, monitor, and remediate. Also keep in mind, cloud and hybrid cloud security and data protection, it's a shared responsibility across different groups in your organization, but also across the different locations, across the different public cloud providers, across the different software stacks. Your weak link is just that. Your point of vulnerability is that weak link. Find where those weak links, those vulnerabilities are, and remediate them. So know your biz, know your apps, your workloads. The best solution, the best strategy is the one that works for you. And with that, let's bring Gladys back in and do some Q&A. Oh, by the way, there's my contact information, storageioblog.com, storageioblog.com, my books, Twitter, storage.io, and my email, greg@storage.io. Gladys, are you there? Hello?
Well, while we wait for Gladys.
Yep.
Are you good? Okay.
Sorry, guys, rookie move. I had muted myself.
No worries. I had like a cat scratchy throat. I had to get a drink of water there, so I had to bring you in fast. Sorry about that. We got time for a couple quick questions?
We do have plenty of questions, excuse me. And I'm going to squeeze in as many as I can. Folks, if you have any questions for Greg, throw them into the Q&A box now, and we're going to get to as many of them as we can in the next couple of minutes. Greg, I'm going to start with a question from Will, who asks, our security team wants total control over everything and anything cloud security related. How do we get them to work with other groups or teams?
One is take it to management. Go up the stack to that point in management that is common across your different organizations or higher. And if they're willing to take all responsibility for when and if something happens, including, restoration, all aspects to it, you might be inclined to say, well, geez, go have a go at it. But that's not good for the business. That's why you want to go up the stacks. Try to work with them. Make them understand what it is you're doing, understand what they're doing, learn from each other, cross-pollinate. That all sounds good, sit by the campfire together. But in reality, you got to find that common ground, understand what they need to do their job and what their mandates are, but also to get from higher up management involved.
Great. Next up, we have Quinn. What is the most common security vulnerability you see that surprises you at companies in a hybrid storage environment? I love this question. Thanks for asking.
The most common, I mentioned it already, is something as simple as not having HTTPS turned on their website. That one's that's still a head scratcher. The other one is that they've left endpoints unsecured, that they've left a bucket, that they've got a bucket or a container, and when I say container, object or blob storage, that they've left endpoints to storage, to files, open for world access, where people can just go in there and read without some other layer of authentication. And maybe it's a read-only environment. Well, then the problem becomes somebody by mistake put a file, a document, something in that open to the world folder and started doing some things with it. Or that the things that were put into that might be accessible to the world, but that they haven't enabled passwords, that if somebody has the URL, they can get to it, but they haven't put other layers of authentication on it. Those are common. And when you hear the big exposures, that's usually what they're tied back to.
Right. And it's kind of piggybacking on that response, Greg. We have something from Mike, who I think is kind of being facetious, but I want to ask it anyway. Why bother with all of this stuff when the clouds provide their own security? And the reason I laugh at Mike's question here, Greg, is that when you were talking about buckets just now, there was a time when I was covering week after week instances of AWS S3 buckets just being left open because of user error, and AWS in response rolled out a couple of security tools, monitoring tools to help IT alert IT to open security buckets. The buckets have just been left totally public, but those exposures still happen. So I guess that's the answer to Mike's question, is these things keep happening. So, but Greg, what's your take on this? Why bother with all of this when AWS, just to pick on AWS, but also Microsoft, have their own native tools already?
Ding, 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 ding. We have a winner. You're spot on, Gladys. You're spot on, is that AWS, as an example, went a step further, which was that, they have the tools that say, hey, your windows are unlocked, your doors are open, your buckets, your containers, your file shares are open. Did you intend to do this? But they also went a step further, as have the other preventers, by making the default that they're closed, that you have to explicitly go and unlock them, then you'll get the warnings as well. So that was, how do you say it, a little bit of like, well, geez, this should be common sense. Well, we better go and implement that, which the providers have done. So that's probably where some of the biggest vulnerabilities is somebody not adhering to the cloud providers' recommended best practices.
Yeah. From MJ, what is meant by zero trust or trust yet verify?
Yeah, real simple. Zero trust, some people use that as don't trust anything, don't trust anyone, that assume everything is just not trustworthy. That's one extreme. The other extreme is, trust everybody, leave everything wide open, our security will handle it. Trust yet verify is trust that people are going to do the right thing, the technology is set correctly, the technology, the tools are working, you've got the right policies, procedures in place, but you're also going to verify it. You are going to test it. You're going to make sure that not only can you restore data from disk or tape or solid state or the cloud, whatever your flavor happens to be, but that you can actually even use it. It's one thing to say, yep, check the box. We recovered from solid state in record time today. Let's go have lunch. Only to find out the DBAs went to use it and the tables was corrupted. Okay, so you have to go those extra steps to trust that the restore worked, but is the data actually usable? And in the course of testing all that you don't cause another disaster.
Right. Yeah. Great stuff. Here we have one from Will again. Is hybrid cloud security as simple as having good backups in case you are attacked? And I'm reading that as what we keep being told, that attacks are a matter of when and not if. So why not just go straight to having good backups if the attacks are inevitable?
Yeah, no, it's a combination. You can't rely just on your security and your network defenses, that you also have to have those backups, those point-in-time copies, those time intervals for different versions, multiple copies in different places. Likewise, you can't just simply say, well, we've got the world's best award-winning backup and data protection solution adhering to whatever. We don't need to worry about other security. Both those extremes, you are vulnerable. You need to have that combination, and you need to protect the backup tools, the catalogs, as well as protect your security credentials and keys.
Great. And we're going to end on a question about shared responsibility. Greg, what exactly is shared responsibility, and what does that mean for cloud security?
Yeah, real simply, real quick, which means that the shared responsibility is horizontal across the different platform providers, whether it's AWS, Azure, the public cloud, whether it's your private cloud, the different tools, but also up and down vertically across the different layers and the different teams, that they all have to work together as opposed to pointing fingers at each other.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Greg. I think that's all the time we have for questions. But everyone, you have Greg's contact information there, so bug him at your leisure with your cloud security, hybrid cloud questions. Thanks, Greg.
No worries. My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.